The Apollo kid is so wavy.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Back with another episode of the Games Memo. This is a weekly solo cast covering news, technology, business, finances, legal issues, and other matters within the gaming industry. So Ramon Terrell, thanks so much for swinging through. Josh Ayers, thanks so much for swinging through. I want to give a quick shout out to the two newest subscribers to the channel, Eric Chaberta, who I think goes by Chopper, maybe Chopper something or other. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your. I didn't look. I didn't write down your YouTube handle, just your YouTube username, I think. And David Elliott, Freebird66. Thanks so much, guys, for signing up to the channel and swinging through whenever you can, or catching me on BRAP or any of the other podcasts I show up at. I want to start this week off with corrections, errors, and feedback. So this will be really cool if more people come through the live show, because they make some comments, and we have some back and forth, and it actually gives me a little more stuff to go over. So the first thing I want to talk about is was a comment that Rachie made when he came through last week, and I was making the analogy, as I often do, to things that happen with Sony Corporation or PlayStation and the analogs to Apple, because I do think in a lot of ways PlayStation, Sony kind of try to mirror a lot of the stylistic approaches that Apple takes to the market. And one of the comments he made in the live chat was that I think what he said was, sorry, Logic, Sony lost Apple. They get their cameras now from Samsung or something or other like that. And so I think there was a bit of a misspeaking on both of our parts. I will readily admit, when I talk about how Apple gets their cameras from, in air quotes, from Sony, I do not specify whether or not I'm talking about the glass or the CMOS sensors. And there is a difference, and I may have even in the past mistakenly said on one random night when I was tired that it was the glass itself. It is the CMOS sensors that they procure from Sony, and so those are the things that are being built, that the Thalgau plant in Austria is being retooled for. Actually, the glass lenses themselves, Apple procures from two primary vendors, one in Taiwan, one in Japan. And so Apple typically takes this one of two approaches to sourcing components. They either will sometimes have one supplier, or sometimes they will diversify, mainly in an effort to ensure that they are not entirely dependent upon one supplier, as was the case like when Intel provided their processors. That was not a scenario that they particularly liked, and it definitely hurt them in the long run. So they do have certain components that they will try and source from different vendors. What Raichi may have meant when he said Sony lost Apple is he may not have meant that the contract for the CMOS sensors had gone to Samsung, who was the other vendor that he mentioned. He may have simply meant that they had lost Apple as the sole source vendor, which is accurate. But Sony is still the primary vendor for those CMOS sensors, as far as I can tell, by a significantly large margin of the work share that goes to Sony. And Samsung is an additional supplier, but I think that the weight of that relationship is primarily in Sony's favor. Okay, yeah, and Josh mentions in the chat, he implied Samsung was doing Apple's camera sensors. Yes, so as far as I can tell, as far as my research found, they are sourcing from both. And then the other thing I want to talk about is a comment that Hero Down Under made. Shout out to Hero Down Under, one of my mutuals on social media, and also a person who frequently stops by this show and others. Hero Down Under made a lot of comments. So first of all, Hero, I want to mention, I just didn't have the time to get to all of your comments that you made on the last video. They were all good comments, not ones that I necessarily agreed with at every step along the way, but one in particular that I want to talk about tonight here in the show opening is, I was talking about the transactional relationship between buyer and supplier and how it works on the capitalist market, and kind of what your power is and what your negotiating stance is, and what those are for the supplier. And the thing that he mentioned was, and I talked about how for the supplier, it is a very unemotional relationship, right? But it is one that is almost entirely objective. And I also mentioned that, no one is trying to do you a solid in a capitalist market. Like, once you move beyond the mom and pop store level and the local town economy, it is all about what each competitor is doing to try and gain the greatest profit margin. And so even when, like, lots of people will say, hey, somebody, this and that person lowered a price, or Xbox offered games via subscription, so now I don't have to pay $70. None of that stuff is ever done because the capitalist corporations are trying to do you a solid. If they're offering their goods at a lower price than a competitor, the only reason they're doing that is because they are trying to undercut their competitor in an effort to gain greater market share, so that they increase their scale and so their profit margin improves. Like, these are simple, basic economic principles, measures, and tactics that are used on capitalist markets. None of it is this attempt to attribute altruism to any particular vendor. They are all doing it for the purposes of gaining a capitalist advantage. So as I was going through all that, one of the comments Hero made was, he felt that my structured kind of hypothesis of this was built on an incorrect tenet that the buyer and the supplier see the same value in an exchange. And an earlier comment that he made was, a seller is selling a house, but a buyer is buying a home. And so he made this comment about, how two sides of a transaction may regard the good being bartered for as different values, in different levels of importance. And then I'm tying it back to the comment he made earlier about the home. So houses are a little different because houses are bespoke, and that's different than a COTS appliance being sold at scale, because it is exactly the opposite, right? It's not bespoke. It is this PlayStation gamer and this PlayStation gamer and that PlayStation gamer are buying the exact same thing. It is like buying a Big Mac at McDonald's, right? The whole point of the Big Mac was to make sure that if you bought that burger in Georgia and somebody else bought that burger in Michigan, they were getting the exact same thing. So in some ways, I will say semantically, or maybe syntactically, what Hero Down Under was saying is correct, and I don't necessarily agree with him from that perspective. But the aspect of it that I disagree with is just because a commercial vendor sees a product at a certain value and you see a product at a different value, number one, where that's true, it is still in the realm of the barter exchange system, because if a vendor offers that product for $200 and you feel that product isn't worth $200, then you can choose not to buy it, right? That is literally the foundational concept of economics. Now, where I do heavily disagree with here is where I thought he was actually trying to point at. I think he agrees on the quantification of the value proposition. I think what he was trying to describe, and what I do strongly disagree with, is the note that the buyer associates some degree of sentimental or emotional value coupled with that product. And while the buyer may feel that exists, the supplier either doesn't, or if they do, that's a thing for them to play on. But what I will say most pointedly as a buyer, if you allow yourself to maneuver into that position, the major problem is that at that point you have given up a large amount of your negotiating power with that supplier. Again, it's not the same thing as a COTS appliance, but I do want to go back to the seller selling a house, buyer buying a home. If I'm a seller and I get one whiff that at a point in the back and forth, right? Because bartering for a home is could be a 4 to 6 week process, right? In that timeline, if I get one whiff that you have started to tie emotional value, sentimental value, that you've started to envision you and your family living in the house that I am trying to sell, that puts me in a stronger bargaining position, a stronger negotiating position, because I can tell now that you have gotten to an emotional point where you feel like you have to buy that house. That is a thing that I would contend, having sold and bought a number of homes, that is not a place you should allow yourself to get to. And where PlayStation gamers have gotten to most recently over this physical versus digital thing, not all of you, but some, and it's some in terms of where the conflict exists. I feel like part of the dichotomy, right, in the conversation we're trying to have is you've allowed yourself to get to a position where you have tied an emotional or sentimental value to a good that Sony and PlayStation simply see as a good that is being sold at a certain price. And so again, if you allow yourself to get into that state, into that position, then I think you've given up a lot of your negotiating strength. With regards to how this thing is going to go down, I think why the conversation has gotten difficult and why it's been difficult for me to have the conversation with some of you is because I feel like if you are in an emotional state with tied sentimental value to that good, and it bothers you as much as to me it seems, because I'm tying how much it bothers you to the quantification of discussion that I see around it, to the fact that in a lot of places that I go, literally it is the only thing clogging up the entire feed. This is now 2 weeks after this happened. Then if you've tied that type of sentimentality and emotional value to it, then I feel like you should be going scorched earth and leaving the ecosystem, because that's what I would do. If you have tied that emotional value and sentimentality to it and you are not going scorched earth, there's one of two things. Either you're still maneuvering for time, right, expecting them to walk it back, thinking that something is going to change, which it's fine for you to assess the situation that way. Or the reality is that while it's an emotional problem for you and you're struggling with it, it's actually, in reality, it's actually more important for you to be able to play PlayStation games, for you to continue to exist within the ecosystem. There's more emotional baggage tied to being part of the ecosystem and that being part of your lifestyle, because gaming is a lifestyle. There's more value on that than there is with buying physical media, and you simply haven't come to terms with the struggle. And that's fine. I think the difficulty I have in trying to discuss it with you is when that's the reality, but you're not admitting that, right? Then I think we start getting into a place where people start making assessments that don't really match up to the reality, and then there's a chasm, right, in the communication because the way we view objectivity is different, right? And it's widened too far to where there's a gap where we can't get through the conversation. So I thought it was a really great point that he brought up. And there are, pieces of it that I agree with and pieces of it that I don't. Yeah, Ramon says, same with buying a car. If they know you like it, you are done. Ramon says, I think because gamers become too emotional or sentimental. Actually, I'm going to probably getting older and my eyes are getting bad. Move my MacBook Air here a little bit closer. I think gamers become too emotional, sentimental, but PlayStation also seems to have lost the plot that the product they provide inherently has an emotional component to it. And so, Ramon, I'm going to agree with you and also disagree with you in very much the same way that I both agree and disagree with Hero. So I think, one, the element to which they understand that it has an emotional component to it is a thing that, again, places them in the advantage in the bartering position, right? But I also think it causes, right, when they have to make this decision. So let's just for the sake of argument, let's just assume that they're making a decision for a financial reason, and where admittedly, it may sound like I'm defending PlayStation, right? Or defending any company in the decision they made. But what I will say on the gaming landscape, and this is the thing that I think we all have to admit to, and where I was trying to kind of drive the conversation last week, I think a thing we all have to admit to is that the gaming market is challenging right now. It is difficult for companies to continue to be successful. And I think, gamers and companies are going to have different measures of success. What I can definitely say is Xbox being at a 3% profit margin is not successful. They are operating that business almost at cost. They are almost spending as much to run that business as they are making from it. They are basically breaking even, and the small amount that they're making in profit is a scary amount. That for a standalone business is an area where you are definitely thinking about that you're potentially going to be looking at declaring bankruptcy soon. PlayStation isn't quite there, but I think if PlayStation does not meet its challenges, it could quickly find itself right heading in that direction. I mean, I think that's why Totoki took the stance of look, this 8-9% profit margin is not it. Like it's got to turn around. And to their credit, they did after a year of extremely tight fiscal discipline. So then we get into the area where, okay, at 8, when people are doing layoffs, right at that point, there are questions to be asked. I think that the optics for Microsoft, when they are making, as a corporation, when they're making incredibly high margin, and they are part of the $1 trillion club, the optics on then doing those layoffs after showing the avarice that you showed in procuring those companies definitely has a more ratchet optic to it than if you are a PlayStation and you're part of a $150 billion company. You are 1/10 or whatever of the size, right, of or less, of the other corporation, and you have done layoffs, but you have not done them at scale, and you have done some acquisitions, but you have not done them with kind of the wild avarice of Microsoft and Xbox. In both situations, neither set of layoffs are good, but but like I said, the optics on them are going to be different. If you're laying off people so that you can get to a better defensive position of 12% profit margin, is that survival, right? Is that you doing what needs to be done? Xbox laying off 3,200 people for a grand total of 9,500 people. Is that survival? It's still survival to a certain extent, right? Particularly at 3% profit margin. But again, you put it hand in hand with the corporation was one of the people that drove economic conditions to the state where that became your own state of affairs. And the corporation arguably has the resources to continue to fund you as a loss leader, but has lost the appetite for doing so. So, and again, this is not my attempt to say one situation is better than the other. I'm saying that the situations are different, and so people are going to view them different. Gaming is art, and business people get wrapped up in the art and forget the business. Xbox is on a knife edge. If Microsoft didn't own them, they would be gone. Josh, I think that's absolutely true. PlayStation has been heavy on they need to tighten their belts for 3 to 4 years. Yeah, that's true. But I will also say, again, as I think I've mentioned, Bungie had a particularly unique lean in the direction of fiscal irresponsibility, and I think that's why Totoki called it out, right? It was, I think, a good deal beyond what the way other PlayStation studios behaved, and I think that was one of the reasons, like I said, he identified it as such. So let's go on and start dealing with the rundown. So we got 3 primary news stories tonight. We're probably going to wander and meander on a couple topics, but let's go ahead and get started. This first news story over on GameIndustry.biz, analysts, game console shipments expected to decline 19.5% to 33.9 million units in 2026. This news story over on GameIndustry.biz by Sophie McAvoy. Game console shipments are expected to fall 19.5% this year to 33.9 million units, according to new analyst data. A report from S&P Global Market Intelligence Kagan attributes this decline to higher console prices implemented to address the ongoing RAM and storage crisis, which is making consoles less affordable for consumers. So one thing I want to say before I get to my rundown and assessment of this news story is a thing that I think is way wrong is in both in the gaming media and social media is there's 2 things happening. We are attributing some wildly derelict, undisciplined commentators as sources, and it is grown and expanded to the point where it is becoming institutionalized. But the continued leaning on Windows Central and Alinea Analytics as authoritative sources in the space, to me, is just crazy. But on top of that, the concurrent thing that's happening, which really upsets this apple cart, is then when somebody like S&P Global Market Intelligence, which is an incredibly disciplined, well-regarded analytical firm, where I'm absolutely, where actual data scientists and data engineers work, crafting and culling and conditioning and assessing this data with discipline, right? They're not hobbyist mathematicians like you have at Alinea Analytics who are extrapolating algebraic relationships off of user reviews, which any high school student could do. They are not the undisciplined rabble that, quite frankly, is at Windows Central, who aren't even formally trained as journalists, and make just, wild speculations based on nothing every other day. Those people are being put in the same bucket. And so what winds up happening is S&P Global Market Intelligence is being called into question on their assessment based on, well, they don't know this, they don't know that. I'm like, again, we need to understand this is a multi-million, maybe multi-billion-dollar company. I didn't look at their market cap, but firm filled with people who are professionally trained and educated, PhDs, people with graduate degrees in data analytics, data engineering, data science, actually doing this work. And so the notion that you would concur with some ragtag outfit like Alinea Analytics and Windows Central, but then call S&P Global Market Intelligence into question is just a crazy time. It is, again, is kind of indicative of the intellectual bankruptcy of, you know, the vast majority of the gaming community. So let's go on with my assessment. So S&P Global Market Intelligence latest forecast projecting a 19.5% decline in global game console shipments during 2026 paints a sobering picture for the hardware business. Ooh, sorry. My script just resized way beyond where it's supposed to be. The analysts point to rising DRAM and NAND flash prices as the primary catalyst, which is increasing manufacturing costs and forcing platform holders into the uncomfortable position of raising retail prices on hardware that consumers generally expect to become less expensive as it ages. I don't disagree with that assessment. Higher component costs inevitably translate into weaker demand, right? As costs go up, typically, right, in law of economics, demand goes down. Admittedly, in the luxury space, we have the Veblen effect, and so sometimes that makes things different. But let's just take that as a generality. Higher component costs inevitably translate into weaker demand because it raises the price of the higher level system, the system of systems, which is consuming those components. Particularly when consumers are asked to pay more for consoles that have already spent 6 years on the market. However, the more important takeaway isn't the pricing pressure itself, it's these economic headwinds. It's that these economic headwinds are accelerating a structural transformation that was already underway in the console business. Not all three platform holders are equally exposed. I don't know why I'm having a problem reading. It's probably because I've got like dry mouth. Not all three platform holders are equally exposed to these market dynamics. Nintendo remains the best position because the Switch 2 is still in the earliest stages of its life cycle. Regardless of its comparatively modest specifications, it is the newest console on the market, enjoys the strongest momentum, carries the lowest entry price, and continues to benefit from the excitement that accompanies a new hardware launch. Sony occupies the middle ground. PlayStation remains the industry's largest console installed base, possesses arguably the most powerful console currently available in the PlayStation 5 Pro, and continues to benefit from a portfolio of first-party franchises that consumers strongly associate with the PlayStation ecosystem. Xbox, by contrast, appears significantly more vulnerable. Hardware demand has already weakened substantially. Analysts expect shipments to continue declining rapidly, and Microsoft's own console business is operating with very little margin at 3%, which is basically running a business at cost. Any additional price increases, which Xbox itself has predicted, right? They themselves have predicted that component prices for them are going to rise again. And again, their situation is exacerbated because they're not buying those components at volume, so they are not taking advantage of, they are not recipients of as beneficial volume discounts for those components. And in addition to that, when they ask, you know, Foxconn or whatever manufacturer to make a manufacturing run, that manufacturer is going to charge them more because there's more of an opportunity cost for them to build, you know, 800,000 Xboxes instead of 800,000 Switch 2s or PlayStations or iPhones, right? Or any of these other things that are in demand. Any additional increases driven by component costs could further reduce demand for Xbox hardware, which is already projected to hit zero demand in this report, at precisely the moment Microsoft needs consumers to remain invested in its ecosystem as it holds on with a pinky. What I believe many observers are overlooking is that declining console sales are not simply the result of higher prices, they are evidence that the traditional console upgrade cycle has fundamentally changed. Historically, platform holders could depend on a significant portion of their existing user base upgrading within the first several years of a new generation. That dynamic no longer exists. The rise of long-lived live service black hole games has fundamentally altered player behavior. Titles that dominate player engagement are deliberately designed to remain accessible across older hardware because maximizing concurrent users is more valuable than showcasing cutting-edge graphics. As a result, millions of players no longer feel compelled to purchase new hardware simply because a new generation has arrived. In my view, this isn't a temporary slowdown that will reverse itself with better pricing or stronger marketing. It represents a new normal for the console industry. Now, while I will admit that most analysts have recognized and accepted this current as is for Gen 9, not many have extrapolated its impact and projection into Gen 10 in any objective, tangible way with a constructed, articulated framework of what the new console market model looks like. We have on this channel, in defining the tenets of what I am calling the deterministic multi-generational console market model. I'll say that one more time. This is a thing that I am calling the deterministic multi-generational console market model. And the reason I call it that is because it is the one that happens intentionally and that the platform owners are maneuvering towards with full awareness and operating in deliberately, versus what happened this generation, which is that it just basically came to be by happenstance and mistake. They weren't aware of it. My football analogy to this is the Seahawks win a Super Bowl largely because, and I'm picking at the Seahawks, right? But this happens periodically, in like cyclically in football. Teams rise and become big teams in the NFL and go on to win Super Bowls, often because the rest of the league, the rest of their competitors, don't understand the system that the new coach has brought to the table. They don't understand the dynamics of the type of staff that he's recruiting, both in coaching staff and players, right? So this is where we see in the NFL, like these periods of generation. Like we had this time when wide receivers stopped just being fast and became tall, right? And that created a dynamic. We had a change in kind of the physical build of cornerbacks and safeties. We had a change in the build of, linebackers. Sometimes we have players that come along that push this, right? You get a Michael Strahan, and now all of a sudden the defensive schemes all become oriented around linebackers built like Michael Strahan. We have a period of time where linebackers, in their ability to blitz became a thing, right? That hadn't existed before. We have things like the West Coast offense comes in, blah, 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 blah. So my point about the Seahawks, right? The Seahawks go on to become Super Bowl champions because everybody doesn't, and I don't remember the Seahawks head coach name, but everybody doesn't understand the defensive scheme, right, that he's brought to the NFL, the type of personnel that he's recruiting, and how, they run that game, the defensive looks that he's given them, and the way that the rotation happens because of the players that he's stacked. And so one of the comments after that is that, okay, now people get it, right? You get to get out of the bag like that for a year. And then by the end of that year, people get it and people start mimicking it and mirroring it. And then like lots of teams are running, or all of a sudden running a defensive scheme like yours, or an offensive scheme, or whatever like your trick is. Everybody gets it, right? And so now you're at a point where when you face that defense, if you win, it's not by luck or it's not by happenstance, it's because you know what's going on. And this is what I mean in the deterministic multi-generational console market model. We had the beginnings of a multi-generational console market this generation, but it wasn't deterministic because the platform owners didn't drive towards that, right? They were caught off guard. They're trying to contend with it. The impact of the black hole games wasn't fully understood. Now they get it, right? And so now next generation, it's going to be a thing. Hey, what's up, Dry Chisel? Thanks so much for coming through. Ramon Terrell says zero demand is incredible. Ramon, children criticizing adults about a job they barely grasp. So the reality should reshape. I'm gonna have to take a drink, guys. I'm sorry. This is why I'm fumbling my words so much, because I suspect I'm a little dehydrated, but I also just haven't gotten any fluids. And yes, I know that caffeine is a whatever they call it, a dehydrant or whatever, but you got to do what you got to do. Okay. The reality should reshape the strategic priorities of both Sony and Microsoft over the next several years. Rather than viewing cross-generation development as a temporary bridge between hardware generations, it should become a core pillar of platform strategy, lasting the entirety of a 7 to 8 year Gen 10 of consoles, potentially. Right, and so the difference that I'm talking about in this model is where we have, we've continued cross-gen software development for like the first couple of years of the generation, and then we've declared this line of demarcation where, we've said, okay, no more games going to last gen. That I don't think that's going to happen next time around. Development tools, SDKs, and game engines should continue moving toward a code once, deploy everywhere philosophy that minimizes the engineering effort required to support multiple hardware configurations simultaneously. And yes, I've said it on this channel before too. I know this is the dream that we've been chasing since the 70s, right? The code once, run everywhere. I don't necessarily think we're talking about code once, run everywhere. I think, there's some ad copy going on at Microsoft that they're talking about, oh, build your game for Windows and then push this button and it'll deploy on console. I think that's a different level of stretch. I think a achievable level of stretch is saying code once for the PlayStation platform, because again, as I've talked about, this is how it predominantly happens, right, in on iOS, right? You don't necessarily code your application for iPhone, code your application for iPad, code your application for watchOS. There's a little bit of that, but by and large, you're coding one application, and then there's contextual awareness of the application and what hardware it's deploying on, and then that's when it picks those options in how it unpacks and how it behaves. Rumors surrounding PlayStation's efforts to support lower power operating modes reflect exactly the kind of thinking that will become increasingly important. Future console ecosystems are likely to consist of multiple performance tiers operating simultaneously, with developers scaling internal resolution, texture quality, effects, and other features depending on the hardware. Pretty much exactly how the deployment landscape looks on PC. New consoles will still launch, but instead of replacing the previous generation overnight, they will expand an increasingly diverse ecosystem from a deployment perspective, creating new 30-50-30 tier splits that persist for many years, the entire generation, in fact. Now, where I think some of you may have heard me talk about this kind of 30-50-30, and the numbers are fluid, they don't have to be considered prescriptive or precise, but what I'm saying as a baseline model to consider is that, look, next generation, within the first 5 years, where I expect we're going to be is a third of your users roughly are on your new console. Only a third, right? Versus, the sometimes 50% or higher that they have been. And I'm talking about in the first 5 years, right? We're in the first 5-6 years of PlayStation, and there's 90 something million consoles sold. I'm saying it's going to be significantly less than that. I'm expecting along the order of magnitude of 30 million. So 30%-ish of your install base is going to be on your newer console. 50% is still going to be on your last generation console. Again, a higher percentage than we've really experienced in this most recent gen. And then another 30% will be on some lower powered version of your console. For PlayStation, that means on this PlayStation 6 handheld, if that comes to fruition, or on some lower power variant like a PlayStation 6 set-top box that runs essentially like the handheld and still takes that low power flag and runs the games in that mode. I'm not sure. The greatest strategic mistake either platform holder could make would be assuming that the market will eventually return to the patterns that made them successful in the past. Sony cannot afford to ignore changing consumer behavior simply because its historical strategy delivered market leadership, while Microsoft should be cautious about believing that a renewed emphasis on exclusives alone will revive Xbox hardware sales. Madness. Exclusive games only move consoles when they become genuine cultural events, and relying primarily on legacy franchises without delivering truly exceptional experiences is an increasingly risky proposition. The next generation of consoles will almost certainly sell fewer units than their predecessors, not because gamers have lost interest in gaming, but because the economics and consumption patterns of the industry have evolved. The companies that thrive won't necessarily be those that sell the most hardware. They will be the ones that recognize the console business is becoming a long-term, multi-generational ecosystem and adapt their software development tools and platform strategy accordingly. Josh mentions, we have seen PS4 MAU still say 40% or so of Sony MAU. Okay, we are going to go ahead and move on to the second news story. This one over on GameSpot by Eddie McCooch. Outer Worlds 2 director reacts to massive layoffs at Xbox and dispels misinformation. The Outer Worlds 2 game director and 20-year Obsidian Entertainment veteran Brandon Adler has reacted to Microsoft's recent mass layoffs at Xbox and other notable changes, which included the reported cancellation of Avowed 2. Adler, who is the current game director on an unannounced project at Obsidian, said, unannounced project at Obsidian. So that's interesting. Let me get through this. Said it was an extremely difficult week at Obsidian after the layoffs were announced on July 6th. Not only have I had to say goodbye to some amazing game developers, but I've had to say goodbye to some of my best friends. I truly feel for every one of them. Know that if you are looking to hire one of these former Obsidian devs, you're hiring some of the best people around, both professionally and personally, he said. So there's a lot to pick at with this whole spiel. And one of the things that I'll mention is Adler is the game director on an unannounced project at Obsidian. From what we've heard, the only project that is supposed to be going on at Obsidian by direction is Fallout. So if he's not the current game director on Fallout, which I don't think he is, because I think we heard Sawyer is, then I don't know what he's working on, and I don't know that he's going to be the current game director on that project for much longer. So that's the first thing that kind of puts a lot of this kind of in a questionable disposition for me. Let me grab some more to drink, and we'll continue on here. So, following Microsoft's... Oh, and one other thing I'll mention. Another thing that we've heard is, and again, I don't know if it's true, is that supposedly there's a small team continuing to work on Avowed 2. What is possible is that clearly Fallout is not in full production yet. It is... they just got told to do it, so it is obviously in pre-production. I wouldn't even necessarily say it's in pre-production. It's probably still in ideation right now. They clearly don't have a design doc ready to go, so you probably have a very small number of people in total at Obsidian who are working on the design doc and the notional architecture and the baseline pitch, which is another kind of weird thing in the decisions that got made. You're going to cancel all these projects that people are working on, tell Obsidian to make almost as if somebody who doesn't understand software development in the game business is making these decisions. And you're going to tell them, pencils down, stop working on everything else, work on Fallout. And I'm like, okay, like 10 of us can work on Fallout right now. Like the other 90 people at the studio cannot work on it yet because we don't even know what the hell the new Fallout game is or looks like. So what are these other 90 people supposed to do that you're paying? Well, hopefully they're doing something. Or, as I said last week, I wouldn't necessarily believe that just because, some percentage of your people got schwacked in the first round of 1600, that anybody is safe from not being schwacked in the next 1600. It's a risky thing to believe in. So, my hope is that people are continuing to work on it because simply their work isn't ready for them actually to work on Fallout. What I hope is not happening, quite honestly, is that there's some rogue group of developers running this like a GarageBand project like Pentiment was, because there's a couple things, right, that could become an abrupt instance for them is, Xbox leadership could get wind of it, which they probably have because it's in the press, and say, that's fine if they're working that in their spare time. I hope I better not see any labor hours being charged for this because I didn't say that I was paying for that. Like, that wasn't approved, is one possibility. And then even if they are running it like a GarageBand project, that's fine. But then morale is already a problem. It's a hard thing to consider that people may be like taking their leisure time out to work on something like this, and then at the end of the day, it still may not become a thing that Xbox publishes. The description around it I heard was that there was hope, again that term hope, that if we keep working at it and we get it into a demonstrable state and it looks good, that Xbox will say, okay, fine, go ahead and publish it. Again, a risky proposition. So at any rate, to talk about Adler's comments. Following Microsoft's latest wave of layoffs, the Outer Worlds 2 game director Brandon Adler publicly pushed back against online claims that Obsidian Entertainment had somehow lost its identity. His comment centered on correcting what he viewed as misinformation. That the developers responsible for the studio's success were gone, and that today's Obsidian is no longer the same company. While I appreciate the desire to defend your team, I'm not convinced that these comments were necessary. One of the recurring problems in the modern games industry is that executives and developers spend far too much time engaging in conversations with the public that ultimately do little to improve either the product or the business. My philosophy has always been simple. If you are not looking for someone else's opinion, don't invite the conversation. For a single player game, especially, right? And I'm saying for a single player game, when you're doing a multiplayer game, you kind of probably should, and you have to have a conversation with the customers because you're dependent upon their feedback to help assure that you're making something that people are interested in playing. But for a single player game, the best response isn't a debate on social media. It's just shipping a great game. Hey, what's up, hero? Thanks a lot for swinging through. I did talk about you at the beginning of the show, talked about one of your comments and my agreement and disagreement with it. So hopefully you'll have an opportunity to go back to the beginning of the show and listen to that. Okay, more importantly, I don't believe the conversation surrounding Obsidian has primarily even been about whether the studio has lost its creative identity. In fact, I think any of those criticisms misunderstand Obsidian's history altogether. The studio has never been defined solely by Fallout New Vegas. I think there's an endemic problem where people say, Obsidian, great studio. Okay, what of their work are you familiar with? Oh, I know they did Fallout New Vegas. Okay, like they've done a ton of other stuff. Its catalog stretches back decades through titles like Icewind, Icewind Dale 2, Knights of the Old Republic 2, Pillars of Eternity, Tyranny, Pentiment, Grounded, and now Avowed. Viewed across that broader body of work, Obsidian has remained remarkably consistent. It has always been a studio that produces thoughtful RPGs and narrative-driven experiences that often become cult classics rather than blockbuster mega hits. Many of their games become popular years after they were released. I don't question whether Obsidian is still Obsidian. What I do question is how any studio can maintain the same development velocity after losing roughly a quarter of its workforce. That distinction is where I think much of the public discussion and analysts' responses missed the mark. Layoffs don't necessarily erase a studio's culture, but they absolutely affect productivity, scheduling, and output. Software development is ultimately constrained by resources and impediments, and when a substantial percentage of people disappear, future release schedules inevitably change. You simply do not have the same capacity to allocate to a project increment and to your incremental sprints. Now, this has a limit. Software architectures do not permit unlimited elasticity to produce more software by piling on more people. You can only add people with resultant improvement in velocity based on how much you can atomize and decompose the software along modular lines so that teams of the smallest effective size can work on them. Fred Brooks, author of The Mythical Man Month, which is typically required reading in software engineering grad school programs, I know it was in mine, famously said 9 women cannot make a baby in 1 month. Ironically, I remain fairly optimistic about Obsidian itself in comparison to other Xbox teams impacted by the layoffs, because the studio has been one of Xbox's most productive teams throughout this console generation. I often say the biggest get that Xbox got out of the acquisitions was Obsidian. Just like I say for PlayStation, some of their biggest get in their recent round, in their round of acquisitions going back like 10 years or so was Insomniac. My larger concern is Xbox's portfolio as a whole. Looking across Xbox game studios, I see a significant gap in first-party releases developing over the next several years. For any of you who follow me on Blue Sky, I kind of laid down some baseline projections of where I see them producing these tentpole titles that they've talked about based on where each team is dispositioned right now in the production pipeline. And it looks bleak for, the timeline beyond Clockwork Revolution. I don't know that any first-party studio is going to be able to put out a game in later 2027, 2028. And so I don't know what they're going to do about their portfolio. I do project Obsidian and Machine Games getting games out in 2029, but that leaves a big bathtub. So looking across Xbox Game Studios, I see a significant gap in first-party releases developing over the next several years. A bathtub period where the company simply won't have enough new software arriving to maintain momentum from its first party. Unlike the content drought earlier this generation, Xbox now enters that period with significantly fewer employees, fewer net studios, significantly lower morale, and fewer development resources than it had before. You cannot do good, high-velocity dev work when you're constantly worried and looking over your shoulder, and when the criteria for success and retention is unknown. To me, those problems point toward broader strategic failures inside Xbox rather than isolated staffing decisions. The Game Pass strategy appears to have driven an aggressive studio acquisition tactic built around maintaining a constant catalog of first-party content. Now that subscriber growth has failed to meet expectations, Microsoft seems to be pivoting away from that approach toward managing a smaller collection of blockbuster franchises. That transition makes business sense on paper, but it also exposes how tightly coupled the studio strategy was to the original Game Pass thesis. Once confidence in that business model weakened, the enormous development organization built to support it suddenly became an overpriced cost center instead of a competitive advantage. The result has been repeated restructuring, shrinking headcount, and increasing uncertainty about how Xbox intends to fill its software pipeline over the remainder of this generation. If I were advising Xbox leadership, my recommendation would be a mix of shoring up and modernizing creative direction and tightening up on organizational discipline, mostly fiscal discipline. First, truly flatten the organization by eliminating unnecessary layers of management, but especially stop adding new executives while simultaneously talking about becoming leaner. So my point here is, yes, Sharma has claimed and asserted that she is going to flatten the organization and remove the 14 layers of leadership, of management that supposedly was between people asking something and getting a decision made. But my problem is while she asserts that, she is bringing over more executives. And the analogy that I use for this is in some workspaces, right? We talk about the white hat phenomena, and that's like, say, for instance, in a highway construction project, right? You will drive by and you will see 5 or 6 white hats, typically in like leather shoes and business casual attire, standing around watching one guy doing work, right? And so in those environments, there is an uneven degree of supervisors who are not skilled laborers, observing people doing work. My point in the 6-to-1 ratio is to paint this picture that they're observing an underfunded, understaffed group that they're expecting to do a vast amount of work, while tons of them just stand around watching them do the work. But in particular, this is an army of executives, right? And I talked about this phenomenon a few weeks ago. Not only is Asha running her mouth to the same degree that Phil did, but there's more of them now. Now you've got Matthew Ball running around doing interviews, Matt Booty showing up doing interviews, Jason Ronalds running around doing interviews. So there's actually more of them right out on this press tour saying nonsensical stuff. And so I go back to what many of us say over and over again: Xbox just needs to shut up. But again, my main point is that, like, if you're truly talking about leaning up the organization, stop bringing all these executives over who do nothing other than make some of these decisions going around and putting causality and reasons for them that just don't track, don't pass the smell test, don't make any sense. Second, dramatically reduce the company's social. Here's my point. Secondly, dramatically reduce the company's social media presence and stop engaging in constant public messaging that often creates more skepticism than confidence. Xbox would benefit from adopting the approach Hello Games took after the launch of No Man's Sky. Stop talking, build the game, and let the work speak for itself. Finally, establish a far stronger governance framework across every studio segment. Every major project should undergo regular program management reviews that measure staffing, budgets, schedules, risks, and return to green plans before small problems become multi-year delays. Great studios, and this is the type of governance, first of all, it's the type of governance that is the norm in every Fortune 500 company, and especially in every Fortune 500 company where things are managed as projects or programs. And it is indicative. It is also the type of governance that we often hear alluded to happens at PlayStation. Every major return to green plans, and I never hear the term like return to green from these guys at all. Like, just things are bad, but there's never a plan on getting things back on track. Great studios don't simply need creative freedom; they also need consistent executive stewardship. Right now, I believe that's the area where Xbox has the greatest opportunity to improve. My other problem with all the executives that Xbox is constantly bringing on, these guys don't do anything. What are they doing? They're clearly not being stewards of the projects that are going on, because every time there's a failure, they all act like they're surprised and like nobody knew. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like sitting in the office, trading emails about how you can cause PlayStation to implode by getting them to overspend, Matt Booty? Like, I don't get it. Right now, I believe that's the area where Xbox has the greatest opportunity to improve. And then also in the area of creative direction. And this is actually like, I think they're making an effort to address the fiscal responsibility by appointing somebody as a COO. I know I just went on a big tirade about stop bringing on like the constantly propagating like bunny rabbits number of exclusives number of executives that I keep hearing about. But I will say, at least in appointing somebody as COO, I've mentioned before, it's kind of a travesty to know that there was nobody below Phil who was gatekeeping, gate guarding, constantly checking up on, quantifying, measuring, and holding people accountable for spend versus output, right? Responsible for P&L, coming up with an AOP for each year. That's flabbergasting. But in the area of creative direction, here's another point of struggle that I see. There is no Miyamoto, right? There is no tribal leader rallying and gathering all the devs, checking up on them, asking them challenging questions, questioning what they're building, right? When they see it, and enforcing, in software development, we frequently have these things called style guides, right? They are guardrails for developers. Like UIs are supposed to look like this. All the processing is supposed to happen. Like you're supposed to take this microservice approach or whatever, right? But largely for front end development, we have these things called style guides. And we also have these things often called design authorities. We have specific senior engineers who are designated, who provide design oversight. Sometimes they're not actually writing code and doing implementation, but they are senior level, like, you can call them fellows, right, who periodically do these reviews to verify that something is in keeping with the style that's expected by the studio. I don't know who that is at a senior level at Xbox. Again, there is no Miyamoto. But the other example that I see is, nor do you have the generals that I see over at PlayStation. And so I kind of call the people who are the heads of the S-tier studios at PlayStation, which is another term that I can't apply to Xbox. I wouldn't ascribe any of the studios at Xbox being an S-tier studio. But they don't have the generals that I see over at PlayStation. Druckmann, Barlog, Intihar, Smith, Daly, Price, all of those guys, of whom, like those last 1, 2, 3, 4 that I mentioned, are at Insomniac. And perhaps most obviously, Yamauchi at Polyphony, right? Who is again, somebody who I refer to as kind of a developer, designer general, right? Somebody who establishes a pattern, sets a bar of excellence, raises people to meet that bar of excellence, challenges them along the way, tells people when their work is not good enough, right? And is constantly trying to raise the bar and move the art forward. I don't know who that is at Xbox. And in a world where I clearly have a company that has no problem airing either its clean or its dirty laundry in public, I don't believe that, they exist, but they just don't talk. Great Scott, everyone at Xbox talks, So, if these people exist, I'm certainly not hearing from them, which causes me, again, given the prevalence for this organization to run its mouth constantly, I don't believe that exists. I don't believe that's within like the ethos of the organization. I don't believe that's how they think, that's how they mentor, that's how they coach. So, I think that's a thing that they can afford to take a round turn on. Oh no, I didn't trash you, Hero. I just said we had a philosophical disagreement. And there are parts of things that you said that I agree with and parts that I didn't. Ramon says, more and more I'm starting to wonder if Asha is slimming Xbox down to make it attractive for a buyer. Yeah, that's my going theory right now. Package. Ramon mentions, Mojang and other studios. Yes, Mojang and King specifically are reporting directly to Asha. Josh here says, no COO, no wonder they are up Crap Creek. Josh also mentions, I doubt they exist. They wouldn't be able to shut up working at Xbox. Okay, let's go on and talk about the last news story. Ubisoft says it's going a little quiet after Assassin's Creed Black Flag resynced ahead of significantly bigger years with more games. This news story over on Games Radar by Jordan Gerblick. Assassin's Creed Black Flag resynced, the long-awaited remake of Ubisoft's open-world pirate game, is finally here, and with a slew of positive reviews and guides on ship upgrades and loot chests making the rounds, it's easy to forget there isn't a whole lot on the company's release slate in the immediate future. We've got Rayman Legends Retold coming in October, and there's a bunch of upcoming Ubisoft games without firm release dates, but Ubisoft diehards looking for their next fix might want to drop anchor and soak in the vibes for a while. In Ubisoft's latest financial report, the company itself admits it's going into a relative period of quiet after Assassin's Creed Black Flag resynced, saying a lighter new release slate will be followed by stronger releases in fiscal year 2027 and 2028, which runs April 1, 2027 to March 31st, 2028. Man, I might have to start bringing water to these things. I'm parched. All right, Stanley Cup is over there on the other side of the green screen, so maybe I'll put the Stanley Cup over here next time around. Anyway, my perspective on this. Ubisoft recently announced that following the release of Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resync, the company intends to go a little quiet before returning with what it describes as significantly bigger years ahead. In my view, that is exactly the right strategy. In fact, getting tonight's theme. In fact, it's a lesson I wish more publishers would adopt, or as that's the previously discussed Xbox. There comes a point where talking about what you're going to do no longer builds confidence. It simply invites skepticism. Ubisoft doesn't need a public relations campaign right now. It needs a steady cadence of successful game releases. We've seen this philosophy work before with studios like Hello Games, as I previously mentioned, following the troubled launch of No Man's Sky. Rather than spending years trying to convince players that things would improve, Hello Games simply put its head down, delivered update after update, and allowed the quality of its work to rebuild its reputation. Ubisoft would be well served by following that same blueprint. What's particularly interesting is that I don't think this approach is entirely new for Ubisoft. The company has always had a tendency to quietly support games long after the headlines appear. Whether it's The Division 2, Riders Republic, or even the oft-ridiculed Skull and Bones, Ubisoft has repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to continue investing in communities that many other publishers would have abandoned years ago. Those games rarely dominate gaming news cycles, and Ubisoft doesn't spend much time patting itself on the back for continuing to support them. The company simply keeps shipping updates. Ironically, that's one of Ubisoft's greatest strengths, even if it rarely receives credit for it. Like, if somebody wanted to talk about there being attacks, I mean, there is definitively unquestioned an Ubisoft tax, right, in the press, or at least in the gaming communities, much more so than I have any belief in an Xbox tax. The disconnect is part of what I often refer to as the Ubisoft Nickelback effect, or Ubisoft Nickelbacking, or Ubi Nickelbacking. Much like the band Nickelback became fashionable to criticize despite consistently producing commercially successful music, Ubisoft has become one of the gaming industry's favorite punching bags. Its games routinely earn solid review scores, sell millions of copies, and build active player communities, yet public discourse often shifts almost immediately toward declaring them failures or dismissing them as just another Ubisoft game. The perception surrounding Ubisoft frequently becomes detached from the measurable performance of its products. Assassin's Creed Shadows appears to have performed well commercially, and early indicators suggest Black Flag Resynced is doing the same. Whatever criticism exists online doesn't seem to be preventing customers from actually buying and playing Ubisoft's games. Gamers love to move goalposts on sales numbers as well. And so one thing I will call out is this routinely happens. You know, one day, 3 million units sold is great. It's amazing. It's proof that Game X on my preferred platform or from my preferred creator or from studio, whatever, right? Or you know, a sales number that corroborates, you know, my narrative or whatever gaming political agenda I'm on. 3 million is great. That's a fine sales number. And then the next week, 3 million is suddenly bad, right? because again, it does corroborate with my narrative or agenda to slag or drag a given platform or publisher or whatever. So that is another part of the dynamic that goes on here. Perhaps the most impressive aspect of Ubisoft's recent performance is that it has managed to continue shipping meaningful content while simultaneously undergoing one of the largest organizational restructurings in its history. And really, I mean, not just in Ubisoft's history, but across the industry. Meaning, not many other big publishers or whatever have gone through this degree of total reorganization, restructuring, getting down to a point where it is definitively, it's lost like the vast majority of its, like it's gone. I mentioned, in an episode earlier in the year, it's gone from being a $7 billion, $8 billion company down to being south of $1 billion, right? So again, we go back to the state Xbox is in, and this is the type of thing that would happen if Xbox was standalone, right? This is a company that, I think its market cap valuation was at some point was like 870 million, right? So definitely at a point where it's, nearing insolvency and having to declare bankruptcy. They're basically doing very much the same thing Embracer was doing, but doing so while successfully shipping games and feeding those communities and delivering on live service titles like Skull and Bones and Rainbow Six Siege, the shutting down of XDefiant notwithstanding. The company has also consolidated studios, reorganized internal teams, reduced headcount, navigated labor disputes, and dealt with years of negative publicity surrounding workplace misconduct and financial performance. Yet despite all of that, Ubisoft continues to release major titles and expand existing live service games. That stands in contrast to several other publishers that have struggled to maintain production momentum during periods of restructuring. While no organization emerges from layoffs unscathed, Ubisoft has demonstrated an ability to continue executing even while fighting in what amounts to a strategic defensive retreat. And I gotta say, I think, everybody doesn't have to agree with me. I think there's an argument that it's working. I don't know that there's a huge sentiment that Ubisoft is on the verge of going under, right? That's, where that assessment is really wide and prevalent. Again, I'm certain in the nickel-backing circus, corners, that's absolutely what they, but I don't know of a, real unbiased, opinion that, that Ubisoft is doing all of this and we're still in a bubble where it's likely to not work, right? Where it's going to tip over at any point. And certainly they've dispositioned themselves where if things got really critical and it looked like they've split these things up into creative houses where if they had to sell off the IP from one house to keep the other two afloat, that's certainly a possibility. But it seems like right now these things are working, and they've put out these titles during the restructuring and downscaling, and they're going to sell those things, and that plus their back catalog is going to give them maneuvering room to live another day, right, and get on what will theoretically be a more regular release cadence in the next fiscal year. Going quiet then shouldn't be interpreted as surrender or a lack of confidence. Instead, I see it as an opportunity for Ubisoft to complete the reset it has already begun. Announce games closer to launch. Stop revealing projects years before they're ready. I think, hopefully one of the things they're learning about this is stop claiming, stop telling us about Prince of Persia, being in development. Stop, hinting at Splinter Cell, just take the Sony Santa Monica approach, and don't show stuff, don't talk about stuff until you're confident that it's pretty fully baked or will soon be pretty fully baked. Under promise, shift to under promising and over delivering. Hopefully that also means finally evolving the long running saga surrounding Beyond Good and Evil 2. I just look, either put the thing out or cancel it. At this point, I don't know that you're going to suffer a bunch of negative backlash over canceling it, but just finish the thing up and put it out or kill it, put it to sleep. Which remains one of the last major examples of Ubisoft announcing a project far earlier than it should have. If Ubisoft can move beyond that era and allow its games, not its marketing, to define the conversation, it has a genuine opportunity to rebuild credibility. Sometimes the best way to change the narrative isn't by talking louder, it's by quietly doing the work until the results become impossible to ignore. And I would contend they're already at that point. If they would just shut up, and like I said, I think for the large part they do. I think the thing that they need to back off on is, like I said, constantly talking about stuff that they don't need to be talking about. And one thing we should also realize, like, a lot of their comments, like generally a lot of their comments are just things that come out of earnings call. They're not these sporadic, like, out of cycle interviews and comments. I would say in the downturn before this restructuring started, there were lots of stupid interviews and comments from like Eve, talking about, I can't remember, like NFTs and the use of AI and these things. Like Eve doesn't need to be out doing an interview tour. Like, just shut up, produce the games. And again, I say that more particularly for them, not because he does that, it's not institutionalized for them. But in this time where, again, they're trying to retract and reset themselves, again, same advice that I give Xbox, but it's more firm with Xbox because it is an institutionalized paradigm there. Ubisoft is not constantly talking about its reset, right? And this is my point about how they're going about doing this business. Ubisoft is not constantly talking about its reset in this carefully crafted and orchestrated work in the long con in the way that the Xbox is. It is simply going about the business of doing it for the most part. Let's catch up with the chat. Hero Warrunner says silence is great. People keep asking for GTA 6 trailer 3, and it's like, when your hype is that high, it's only going to go down if you release more info. Yeah, I often say, even in this, like, the normative cycle of like demos and trailers and stuff, I'm like, for a lot of games, it just invites criticism because gamers love to slag stuff. And so for, I almost feel like there's got to be some formula of like, I don't know. I think in general across the gaming industry, and again, it scales, right? There are some organizations that are worse about it, and even PlayStation is bad at it at times. Like I said, this whole physical media thing, like they should have just put up a blog post. They should have just posted, like, they should have just posted a thing, and there was no need for them to put explanation behind it. There was no, look, this is the thing that we're doing. And again, I talked about on another show how this is very much like it was starting to look like it was going to be just like crossplay, right? Where Layden tries to explain why they're not doing crossplay, and then Jim Ryan tries to explain why they're not doing crossplay, and then people we've never heard of try to explain why they're not. And the whole time it was because they were trying to get the cross-platform revenue share clause in place, which at the end of the day was just a bad look, Whereas I get that you couldn't reveal it beforehand, but if you had just shut up, you probably would have gotten some criticism, maybe when that became formally revealed. But I don't know that but you wouldn't have gotten the criticism that not only did you do it, but you were trying to obfuscate and bullshit people about it, right? Claiming all these other wild reasons why you weren't enabling crossplay. And I'm like, just, Ramon Terrell. People pile on and don't let go. A company can mess up and turn it around, but some people decide to hate them no matter what. And look, I get it. Like, first of all, I'm not justifying anything that Obsidian has done. That Ubisoft has done. I'm not saying people should like Ubisoft. I'm not saying that their games are great and beyond reproach. I'm saying objectively, I get that you don't like the design and you don't like the style and you complain about the multiple icons on the map, which you can turn off, by the way. And so I get that. And I get that, like, you hate that the game has bloat and it has, 40 hours of stuff that you don't want to do. Despite the fact that you could just mainline the campaign and be done in 20 hours and don't have to be bothered by all this stuff. But, but that's just me. I understand that. And I'm not saying, you have to like it, but I'm saying that this is one of those things where there's a lot of popularization of, it's fashionable, right, to talk badly about them. Just Sears mentions Beyond Good and Evil 2. Did I say Beyond Good and Evil 2? Or did I say something? Or did I call it something else? I may have just said Good and Evil 2. Gosh dang it. Why is it doing that? I mean, like that game is not like, it is definitely a blind spot for me. I never played it, so I may have made a mistake in the script. And yeah, Beyond Good and Evil 2. That's what I have in the script anyway. I may have said something wrong when I said it. Hero Donor, I ended up pre-ordering Black Flag Resynced Deluxe Steelbook Edition. Hero says, I think I actually love Ubisoft, in spite of their troubles and gimped discs. Hero says, bang on, the games are doing the talking. Warwana, I do find it funny that they announced an actual sales figure for Resynced, but they never told us a sales figure for Shadows. Yeah, I don't know. And I, Ubisoft is not one that I necessarily go out of my way to pull their financials. I have, like, on a couple of occasions, but they're well, because their financial statements have stunk for the last couple of years. I also don't bother to go look, so I don't know that they didn't mention sales figures. Like, again, for PlayStation, there's tons of data available in their supplemental artifacts, which no one ever reads. And you will go in there and you will find just exactly how many copies of, God of War 2018 they saw, even though that doesn't get, publicly talked about at length because nobody's read it. So I don't know that the Assassin's Creed Shadows sales number isn't there. But I think, but again, what I go back to with Ubisoft is, sure, sales numbers matter sometimes, but I think to Ubisoft, and look, I am also not saying that it is a way to run a business and everybody should do it. I'm saying that they seem to do it, and I don't have a business reason. Like, again, I go back to the content approach, right? And I think I've mentioned it before. Like there's no, why is Skull and Bones still a going concern? Like, I don't get that. Like, why is Riders Republic still getting content? I don't get it. Why is there a Ghost Recon community still actively live, on Steam? Like, I don't get it. So I don't know if that's just an institutionalized philosophy with them of that's a way to breed brand loyalty. I often talk about it that is the spirit that caused them to be able to turn Rainbow Six Siege around and make it just one of the, highest earning black hole games that are out there. Which I just don't get. Like, everything that I think that we know in an observation of the history of the gaming industry would have told you, there's no way, you take a beloved, largely single player, but also multiplayer game, and you turn it into a live service, and you don't include a single player campaign, and you nerf and diminish what Terrorist Hunt was. All of us, including myself, said that there's no way that was going to be successful, but here we are. So I don't know. So my point is, I don't know that sales numbers are the most important tracking KPI for them, for all of their franchises and for all of their on per title basis projects. Because clearly they make decisions to make investments and provide support regardless of those KPIs, right? So I don't know. It's crazy. There was a time Ramon Terrell, there was a time I owned more Ubisoft games than any other publisher. Then I stopped buying their games. Now they've gotten me back. Josh, okay, yeah. Josh says he wrote the Beyond Good and Evil 2 before I mentioned it. Sorry, yeah, I am running a little behind. Shadows got a player count, not a sales number. I do remember that. They posted engagement numbers. So, and I don't know why. I will say it has become very fashionable to report engagement numbers and not actual sales. And it took some time, but I've definitely landed. I knew engagement numbers didn't matter for some games and for some franchises, but even for platforms that, like, again, I regard PlayStation as a successful platform in business, the most successful platform in business, by most objective measures. But they were reporting engagement numbers on the PlayStation blog, and we tracked them and looked at them and then started pulling threads and asking questions, and then came to the conclusion that they don't mean anything. Well, I'm not implying it matters or not, but we know the MO for these companies is to share player numbers if sales isn't exciting, share sales if they are good. And so what I'm saying is well, you're saying you're not implying whether it matters or not, but my point is that if the sales numbers don't matter and they're not a KPI that you're using to make decisions, then that means it's not important to you and it doesn't matter to you, and then it tracks that you wouldn't talk loudly about it. People have actively decided to make others know that they hate Ubisoft with a burning passion. I get their takes, but I think it's way overblown personally. Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Arwana. Yeah, and I'm not hard it's not a hard disagree about the sales numbers on Assassin's Creed. I'm just saying the behavior that they represent tells me that they don't always care about the sales numbers, and so it's not unusual to me that they will report some and not report others. Like I don't know what the sales numbers are of Riders Republic. I certainly don't know what they are for Skull and Bones, but the behavior I see is there's continued investment behind Skull and Bones. Like, again, and I will be the first to admit, I don't get it. But does that mean that they regard Skull and Bones as unsuccessful? I'm like, they can't be the case if they're still supporting it, because they viewed X Defiant as unsuccessful and they killed it. So I don't know. Like, there's even like mediocre, like that Rainbow Six like spin-off thing that they did, Quarantine or something like that. I mean, by all accounts, as far as I can tell, that game wasn't successful, wasn't critically well received, wasn't community well received, but I think they're doing like a sequel to it or something. So yeah, it's crazy. Warwater says, why they wasted time on Skull and Bones and not just flesh out the ship battle content more for Resynced? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's so kind of weird to the dynamic between the two teams, because I think we know that like the Black Flag team said deliberately they weren't gonna do, like, Skull and Bones obviously started off as they were supposed to take the Black Flag ship template and just make a multiplayer ship game, and then it became this other like greater thing that they were going to make. So it had, so OG Black Flag begat Skull and Bones, but then there was some comment that, like, deliberately by the designers of Black Flag Resynced, that they weren't like taking back from the well. They weren't taking what had been done in Skull and Bones and adopting it, and they were like, no, we don't need to do that. What we need to do is just do Black Flag over again. I think so. That's a crazy bit of dynamic there too. Ramon says, you got me wanting to get into Death Stranding 2 now. Yeah, I mean, has Death Stranding 2, I mean, lots of you guys are the PlayStation experts in the crowd. Has Death Stranding 2 left the platform? Is it on PC and Xbox now? I can't remember. I would think Ramon says it's on PC. Yeah. So if it's on PC and it's on Steam, I mean, theoretically it'll go on steep discount at some point. I think the way I finally got into the original Death Stranding was because it was one of the free Epic games that they gave away at one point. So yeah, there should be lots of opportunities. So I would go to Steam and wishlist that thing if you were interested in it. Everyone says, I bought it at launch, and a month or two later it was announced I was hot. Yeah. Yep. All right, guys. Well, I think that's going to be it. Fortunately for all of you involved, this does not look like it's going to go on to be another 2 hour, 15-minute episode. There's lots of gaming community stuff that I could discuss tonight. I have a particular nit and beef with the we've peaked on graphics people. The Nintendo fan base is, I think, getting way out over their skis with their prognostications that they're going to be the real winners of the console war when it's all said and done, because Xbox and PlayStation are screwing up so badly. This thought that like in the future, the Nintendo platform is going to be so powerful that it will just be at parity with everything else around it, as if like technological advancements are going to stop on PC PlayStation. Be like, so much that Nintendo just closes the gap and technological power won't matter. I don't think that's the way things are going to wind up. But I don't think we're going to necessarily get into those tonight. Yeah, Josh, that's a claim. Yeah. Some crazy things that I heard while listening to Nintendo voice chat. And I don't disagree with them entirely. I think, quite frankly, Nintendo stands a very good chance, at least within the next 1 year to 2 year time frame, to do very well if it is able to hold its place as the least expensive console in a time when the great age of affordability in gaming is over. It remains to be seen whether or not the $50 move was Nintendo trying to balance ride the fence between the shareholders who were yelling and screaming about raising the price on Nintendo Switch 2 versus the gaming community who's obviously enjoying that console, the market who's obviously enjoying that console being the lowest priced console really on the market. And if they basically what they said to the shareholders, fine, we'll raise the price by $50, so we'll see if they're able to hold that position, again, in the face of the other consoles, raising prices. And if Xbox has to go and pull that lever and raise prices again, they will, for a certain period of time, right, be in a really good position. This is why I go back to, I think PlayStation and Xbox are going to have to release their next console, because you can't just let your 6-year-old project on the market stretch to 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, some of the crazy dates that I've heard proposed, and just let it sit on the market while you are charging a higher price for it. Like my stance is, here's the ultimate culmination of what I've been trying to say. If you're charging $900 for the PlayStation 5 Pro now, I don't know that that makes sense to continue to do that for another year, 2 years, 3 years. Versus, if the other alternative is to charge $1,000 for a PlayStation 6, you might be well suited to just charge $1,000 for the PlayStation 6. And I don't know that the PlayStation 6 is going to be $1,000. I'm just saying, here's what I'm saying in terms of the comparative choices, right? If there's a discussion to delay the next generation console because it's going to be more expensive, I'm like, well, your last generation console is more expensive, and the optics on that being more expensive while you've had it on the market for 6 years, if you're stretching that to 7 or 8 years, I don't know that you're in a tactically better position than putting the new console out at the higher price. If you're able to, particularly if you're able to offer a lower cost alternative, like the handheld, particularly if you were able to continue selling the last generation console, absolutely it would be helpful if you were able to get that price down. Again, in order to kind of like I talked about with the Steam Deck and the Steam Machine, comparing it to like the Apple catalog of products, if you were able to create more space in your pricing structures and tiers, in my belief, the PlayStation 5 Pro will remain in production. And maybe that's a personal bias of mine because I have a PlayStation 5 Pro and I like it. Maybe the answer is you put out the PlayStation 6 and it is $1,000, and maybe because you don't want the PlayStation 5 Pro out there at $900, like butted right up against that $1,000 price setting, and you are worried about it cannibalizing sales, maybe you do pull the PlayStation 5 Pro off the market and sell the PlayStation 5 Digital. And then you've got, a thing at $1,000. You've got a thing at, what is the PlayStation 5 Digital now? Like $650 or something like that. Which is a lot more space. And then you put out the handheld at, whatever price you put the handheld out at. And now you have a now you have a portfolio of products that has some spread across your pricing structure. So I don't know. Remote to our $1,000 enters a space where buyers now are willing to go that high. Might start to consider spending a bit more for a PC. I don't think it'll be $1,000 either. Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, Ramon. I mean, this is the analog, right? The analog to me is the one. It's kind of like the one that I make about like you do layoffs to get head count down, but the collateral damage to that is your high potential people who you didn't lay off because you were trying to retain them also get scared and decide to leave voluntarily. So my analog to that is in the $1,000, like you're already going to sell a smaller number of consoles. And by raising your console price up to, let's just say the hypothetical $1,000, you do have some people who will be riding the fence and will go high and might, start to consider spending a bit more for a PC. But I don't think overwhelmingly so, like in comparison to the small numbers you're already going to sell, that pierces the veil of being anything more than being in the noise. The other thing I would say is, for the people who are wildly prognosticating that that's going to be some huge number, it's not going to be some huge number because, in my opinion, because despite the fact that, yeah, absolutely, like at $1,000, you start to close on to, the $1,500, $1,800 entry PC. There's still a bar there, right? Either somebody's got to become really, somebody's got to put in the time and effort to really research and make sure that they're buying the right thing and make sure that they're buying it from the right company. And then in terms of building, right, again, that's a significant lift. And lots of the potato PC people like to say, oh, it's not that hard, and you just watch a YouTube video and all that stuff. And I'm like, you guys don't understand that there are people who just don't want that bother, who just don't want that in their lives. Like it's flabbergasting to me that sometimes the people who make that prediction, they always want to try and distill it to just being a matter of cost. They always try and distill it to, well, but if you did that, you would gain all these advantages. But they don't, like, there's an initial bar, right? There's an initial, do I want to build a PC? Do I want to be bothered? Do I want that hassle? Do I want all the baggage that comes along with it? Is it really that difficult when I try and quantify it by like the number of labor hours that I'm going to put into it? Maybe not. I'm going to put 8 hours of into it and I'm going to get thousands of operating hours out of it. But that is not the way consumers think. Consumers say, is this a pain in my butt? If the answer is yes, some of them are immediately going to fail out of the loop and move on and not want to be bothered. And that's what the people who raise up these things. It's like, they try and say, oh, well, you're so close. If you just spent the extra $500, like you would gain all these advantages. And I'm like, it's the same type of argument you try and make to a person who is a staunch meat and potatoes eater and they don't eat, foreign or exotic foods, and you're constantly harping on them to try sushi. Like, no, dude, like, dude's a meat and potatoes dude, period. Like, there's no moving that bar. Like, you can't, like, they try and act like the more I overload them with all this techno babble and information on how it's so much better and the chain, like, they're, eventually, no. It's like a person who doesn't watch rom-coms or a person who doesn't listen to rap music. Like, people have bars, people have, barriers to entry that they're just not going to cross because it doesn't interest them. And like I said, that's another part of the argument that they always try and make. Like, it's like they don't take the interest level into account. They just try and make it like an economic argument of, but I look, there's an economic argument against buying new cars, but people buy new cars, right? So I don't know. It's crazy. Sushi is great though. Yes, it is. It is very much, Josh. Those people are missing something. But, I just have, I have a family member who's just like, they are a staunch meat and potatoes person, and Italian. And like, that's kind of it. And so, asking them to do anything exotic or anything like well off the playing field is just like, Ramon Torres says, before I built mine, I couldn't be bothered to even consider it. Yeah. And that's like, and Ramon, you are in that exception group, right? That I talk about. Yeah. There will be people who cross over. But, I don't believe those of, those of you who did it are the vast majority of the addressable market of the demographic. Okay, well, thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the post-episode discussion as well, offered by the chat. Always a good time when you guys get involved and it becomes interactive. It doesn't become just me talking at you for an hour and a half. So appreciate it very much. But you forgot one bit of info on PC. The more you buy, the more you save, NVIDIA. Right. But yeah, that's probably a discussion for another night, Wara. But again, going back to we've peaked on graphics, nobody's interested. We're going to get into it tonight a little bit. So this is another part of the argument that I hate, that I can't stand about the. I know, Ramon, you're playing the Oscar music, trying to play me off stage, but no, this I am going to vent about. This whole thing again of we've peaked on graphics, nobody's interested in power. And it's a larger problem. Because it also dovetails into the affordability argument. And people always try and say, kids only want to play on tablets and phones, and they don't care about like superior graphics. Again, it's almost like we ignore the fact that PlayStation is running a $30+ billion business, right? But on top of that, here's the problem that I have. First of all, I think I mentioned it before. Like, there's this effort in order to gain traction, and this is what I talk about narratives and agendas and politicking. There's this effort to gain traction on, hey, if we smush everything down to the least common denominator and just the average that people want, then we'll be better. And it's almost, I can't remember. I think I was talking to Brap and I said it like, this to me, this is the mentality. And I talked about Yamauchi and like pushing people, right, in having this culture of reaching for excellence and not reaching for mediocre. It's almost like I feel like I'm hearing the pontification that comes out of a generation of people, my generation, who capitulated and pushed this agenda that it was the right thing to give kids participation trophies. And then the kids who grew up under that regime of getting participation trophies and did things like go to Reed College where they don't give you grades because everybody should be seeking, academic study and learning and shouldn't need to measure themselves. One of the things that I always say is as an athlete or a person who works out, and I'm not saying that I work out enough, I definitely need to work out more, but in athletic fields, one of the things that I think is said is like, there's no point in working out without measuring yourself, right? Why do you go run if you don't time yourself? Why do you lift weights if you don't write down how much you lifted? Now, granted, you get to a certain age where there's really no point in quantifying that. Like it's the greater part of the battle is just getting into the gym. But like, why do a thing that you're doing for improvement if you don't measure whether or not you're making improvement? And I think in gaming and art and competitive commercial marketplaces, there needs to be the same thing. That's the point of there being market competition, right? To have people who strive towards excellence. That's one of the ways that products are differentiated. And so I don't think that it's right. I don't think that it's the correct philosophy for us to be having this grand politicking for let's just make everything average. Let's just make everything not exceptional. Let's just make everything mediocre. Let's make everything okay. Let's make everything min spec. Like what in the like what in the flop are we doing? Like where in the world did that come from? And most acutely, I will point my finger at America, who like just culturally and nationally, this seems to become like the thing, like that it's okay to be average. It's okay to be mediocre. It's okay to not seek excellence. Like I don't get it. Like whatever, like I grew like I'm the the future's so bright I gotta wear shades generation. I'm the there's no points for second place generation. I'm the I don't know, like Stan Bush, right? The soundtracks of the 80s, You Got the Touch, The One, all these types of things. Like why is there such this big cultural push towards just being average, just phoning it in, like not being bothered with trying to raise the bar? Like I don't get it. And then this whole thing about like affordability and like we should just make everything AA and indies. as if we don't produce tens of thousands of indie games and tens of thousands of AA games every single year. There is stuff for those people to go buy. There are last generation consoles for those people to go buy. There are low power PCs for those people to go buy. Great Scott, you can go into Best Buy and get something with a barely functional GPU by my standards, right? That runs integrated graphics and play those games. So why are we making this big deal that if there are goods that can be made that people want to make, and if there are buyers that are willing to pay for them, and look, I get as I'm saying this, I may very well be saying that, those of us who want AAA, that want premium experience, that we may have to pay more. I've said that before. Some people don't like it, but that's the truth of the economic matter. It may be true that if you want AAA, you're going to have to spend more on games. And if that means that you are the part of the addressable market that's going to be priced out, then that means that you're going to have to buy the AA's and the indies that I would argue you should be buying now, but you don't. And that's why everything has gone pear-shaped, partially. Because people keep trying to be this anchor and drag the premium stuff down to a point where it's accessible to everyone. And I'm sorry, I just don't know that that can be the case. We're seeing evidence where that's no longer going to be the case. We're seeing evidence that not everyone is going to be able to afford premium experiences. Or if they are, they're gonna take longer to earn the money to buy them, or they're gonna have to buy them less frequently. I don't know. I don't know how people are gonna have to contend with it. What I do know is I personally have a severe problem with the notion that we should just smush and pancake everything together so that everything just becomes common, because this is the argument that I've been making for several years. That starts to make gaming look like a commodity. And it's not. It is a luxury product category, whether you like it or not. And it scales, right? There's certainly there's certainly content that can be and should be at an affordable layer. There's content that should be at a zero barrier to entry layer. But it does not mean, and this is my big problem, it does not mean that everything that's premium should just go away. That argument and that mentality literally pisses me off. And by the same token, I'm not saying that the volume of AAA stuff needs to be what it is. If you want to reduce it, sure. And if you want your argument to be, if it's premium content, make those people pay premiumer prices, fine. But what pisses me off is this whole notion that anything that is premium needs to go away if it's not accessible to the entirety of the market. And it pisses me off because, as Brap always says, we don't have that discussion about other product categories and other goods. We don't say there shouldn't be any $100 bottles of wine. They should all be $20 bottles of wine. It's BS that there's $100 bottles of wine. We don't say that there shouldn't be luxury cars. We don't say that there shouldn't be IMAX theaters. We don't say that there shouldn't be Ruth's Chris or Morton's. We don't say that everything should just be McDonald's, because that's what the majority of people buy. We don't leverage that numbers argument for anything else. Right? We don't say, hey, the vast majority of people just buy an LCD TV. So it's BS that there are OLED TVs, and it's BS that they're priced at a point where I can't afford them. We don't say that. We allow the existence of luxury category products at premium prices to exist. And we don't yell and scream that they be torn down and say that it's BS and say that it's corporate greed that people that are making them. As Slow-Mo said, on an episode that I was on of DPS, it's not I'm getting tired of, it's not that people are mad and they choose not to buy them, which is the proper, I'm going to use that term, which is the proper adult response to things going on in a capitalist market. They are mad and they don't want you to have them. And that's, again, a severe problem. If I want to buy a thing, it's nobody's business, right, to argue and yell and scream that thing shouldn't exist so that I can't buy it. So, yea, verily, the market needs to, the suppliers need to adjust and create spaces where things are affordable. But what I will say is, I don't know necessarily that PlayStation 6 is going to be affordable for everyone, or Project Helix. right? Or 4090 GPUs or 5090 GPUs. And like, this is my problem, I think, War, this is the path you sent me down. Right? People act like nobody wants this stuff. But I'm like, people buy 4090s and people buy 5090s. And in fact, for the most part, that product category in the tier was almost non-existent before the RTX 4000 series. You know, not at the volume and scale, right, that it exists now. Like the RTX, the XTX, XX, 90 SKU wasn't anything that had to achieve the popularity that it has achieved over these last two generations of GPUs. Now, granted, a lot of people, there were periods where people were buying those things for crypto. There were, periods where people are buying them for AI. But the point is that the product category is more popular now despite its increased expense because there is demand for them. So the behavior that I'm going to call out is you are derelict for calling for the removal of things that people want to and are willing to buy because there's X percentage of people who don't want to buy them. It's not that they don't want them, because quite frankly, the way the market responds and reacts is they do want them. This is my point that I go to about like everything should just be AAA and indie because we peaked on graphics and that's what's affordable. No, people don't buy that stuff. What people do is they wait for the AAA stuff to go on sale. That is, again, a huge part of why the market is pear-shaped. Because you guys run around and assert that what everyone wants is AA or AAA or AA or indie. But if that was the case, then people would buy that stuff because it exists. It actually exists in far greater scale and volume than the AAA stuff. When I go back to and talk about how we have an over-inventory, an oversaturated inventory problem in gaming. And quite frankly, about $15 to $30 billion of the market needs to be drained out because it's excessive. And there needs to be a downgrade of the total number of games that are coming out every year. And I apologize for saying, and I'm not saying this to be mean, that does mean there needs to be less studios, and there does mean that there need to be fewer game developers. Because it's the same thing that happens in other industries and markets and areas of human capital. We had a gluttonous country of lawyers for a period of time. And it quite frankly became tough to get a job coming out of law school as a lawyer. And then there was a correction. Right, and we started graduating fewer people, and people went off into other jobs. We had a glut of gosh, I can't remember what they were called. They're not. It was the pair to OA. So there was operational analysis and operational whatever. But it was an area of math, and it was in particular like pointed towards like Six Sigma and type and things like that. I can't remember exactly what the other degree is called. But we had a glut of those people in this country. We had a glut of MBAs in this country. And when we have gluts of things like that, then people go do other stuff. And I would say, I think I talked about this data a couple months ago, maybe, but like when we have millions of software development jobs that are unfilled in industries that need them, while there is an overage of people in the game development space, that may mean, I'm not saying it does, but that may mean that from a pipelining perspective, at least in this country, maybe we need fewer game developers and we need more people filling those other jobs. And again, I'm not saying these things to be mean. I'm saying these things as pragmatic, objective, factual things that may need to be considered that people don't consider because the content creators and the influencers that like spend the most airtime, like recording videos every single day, every other day, jumping on YouTube 5 minutes after a news story breaks, are constantly on these propaganda-oriented, agenda-based platforms of things that are just quite frankly nonsense, right? In my personal opinion. So we don't need to not make great things, good things, high-quality things that people want. Yea, verily, they, maybe people want them in fewer numbers, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't exist. We don't say Ferraris shouldn't exist. So some of the comments here down there: deliver us a moon and deliver us Mars, where other allies. Expedition 33 was an outlier for me. I want for AA to go on much deeper sail. So that's interesting here. Like, yeah, I mean, so it I don't know. It may be that even some of the AA stuff isn't priced right, right, to really move numbers on the market. Yeah, Remote Terrell says, I heard there was a new invention called, oh yes. Yeah, and I mean, I'm despite that rant, like I'm not trying to say like you should go get a second job, right? I admit that I will sometimes say like the fiscal discipline you need to display may be that you have to save up for an extra payday to afford RAM, right? But I don't know what else to tell you. Again, I grew up in a time when we said, life isn't fair. Nobody told you life would be fair. There's no free lunch, yada, yada, yada. And it seems like those are things that like we don't say anymore. Like, that aren't in commonplace, that aren't like an inherent part of the cultural fabric of our society. Again, I will say at least most pointedly in the US. Let's see. Well, Ron, I agree with everything you're saying. People are lazy and fragile to strive for excellence. People are too lazy and fragile to strive for excellence. I'm not. Yes, I grew up. So one of the things that I came through in my training pipeline, and I didn't come up with this. Actually, another person did, but it was kind of a philosophy that like within any organization, you have 20% of your people are always the high performers, and they're always, it's kind of like we kind of always have these things that we say like, the actual work of any company, like 80% of the actual work of any company is always done by your top 20% of people. And then there's other philosophies like so anyway, it's, your top 20% of people are the people you're really dependent upon. Then 50% of your people are in the middle, and those are the people you need, because sometimes you just need bodies on stuff. Sometimes you just need volume, right? You just need the numbers. And then 30% are at the bottom and are actively engaged in fighting this war between the top 20 and the bottom 30, constantly trying to pull the middle 50 up or pull the middle 50 down. Because what the bottom 30 want is they want more numbers, because the more numbers that there are in the bottom 30, the more they go unnoticed and get away with stuff, right? And the more like that mix of the bottom 30 starts to become acceptable. So that was just a philosophy. And so like in response to Ramon, what you say, people are like, I don't necessarily believe that people are too lazy or too fragile, but what I will say is, yes, even on that model, which was a model that, we philosophically kind of oriented around, 30 years ago, when you extrapolate that on the macro level, like you get to the point where, I feel like we're starting to see this slide in multiple industries and multiple segments of the culture where, there's just not this, it's okay to be the median, right? We used to joke when I was younger about like if the minimum passing grade wasn't 70, then it wouldn't be the minimum passing grade. And I think there's a lot more oriented around what is the minimum passing grade these days than, what is operational excellence. Okay, Ramon says, I spent months buying my PC parts on all sale because I couldn't afford to build it all at once. And like Ramon, and like, look, I do the same thing. Like there was a point where, yes, I used to go get all the parts at one time, but yeah, now today, I peanut butter that out so I don't have to take that big financial hit like, all at once. Hero Dennis says, I sold off multiple disc games this week and paid for the AAA games with the money I got. Chopper Eric, thanks so much for coming through, Chopper. I gave you a shout out earlier as a new subscriber to the channel. Appreciate you. Chopper, there are just too many cooks in the kitchen. Maybe some of these smaller studios should look to consolidate and see if they can create the replacements for the older, tired ones. Chopper Eric also says we've had way too many studios and too many games. Strangely, I'm only buying AAA games that I believe in. Ramon Charles says, my striving comment derives from the people complaining about mediocrity and also what I constantly see at work experiencing that ratio you spoke of. It's so true. Ramon says, Hero Under says, I'm buying a 5060 pre-built. I just can't tinker. Yeah, there are options, you know. So, all right, everybody, thanks so much for coming through. I'm sorry. So here we go. You know, I said I was supposed to wrap up at an hour and a half, and now we're going on 2 hours. So I apologize because of the ranting and venting. So I appreciate you. Yes. Sorry, I corrected that. Yeah, it was Hero Down Under saying to Ramon Terrell, I'm buying a 5060 pre-build. I just can't tinker. Yep. So thanks so much, everyone, for coming through. Thanks again, Chopper Eric and David Elliott, aka Freebird66, for subscribing to the channel. I appreciate you. I will be back next week for another episode of the Games Memo as a solo cast. Again, I kind of randomize whatever day of the week I'm going to do that. So just keep an eye on the YouTube channel. And if you follow me, if you see me on Blue Sky, I would typically also mention something about it there. So thanks again to everybody who came by from, you know, Thrifty's Discord and from other corners of the internet. I appreciate you. Once again, my name has been Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Thanks so much again for everybody who came through. If you happen to watch the archive version of this live show, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever I post new content. Enough to Keep Going will be live this Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so please feel free to roll through that one as well. Until next time, good night, good luck, and good gaming. That's going to do it for me. I'm out of here.